Today's lecture will focus on the constitutional foundations of U.S. government. I talked yesterday about the core concepts, democracy and equality. The next step is to examine in more detail how democracy and equality evolved over time. In order to do so, it is necessary to analyze how the U.S. constitutional system came about. So today we are going to examine how the system came about, what kind of institutions were created, and how the framers of the United States thought about government by the people. So specifically, we are going to ask the question, why did the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention take place? What kind of system did it replace? What kind of system was created in Philadelphia in 1787? What was the framers' idea about democracy? And who were these framers? How should we think about them? This will be addressed in part 2 of today's lecture. From Confederation to Federation. The system that preceded the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention were the Articles of Confederation from 1781, really a loose agreement among the 13 founding states that established the United States as a confederation. What is the difference between a confederation and a federation? In a confederation, power is located at the individual state level. They are more powerful than the national government. On the other hand, federation, federal government, means power sharing, a balance of power between the federal government and the states. Although the Articles of Confederation established a firm legal friendship among the states, certain key powers remained with the states. That is what a confederation is about. Strong states, weak central government. One of the most important powers that remained with the states was the ability to regulate commerce and levy taxes. So let's look more specifically at the weaknesses inherent in this confederation from 1781. Without the power to tax, Congress is unable to repay loans. States are interfering with the development of a national economy. Third, paper money issued by the states permitted debtors to pay off their creditors with money worth less than the money originally loaned, creating a large debtor class and as a result a lot of social unrest. People, small farmers, people without money are ready to march to the state houses to start another revolution. Also, the lack of a strong central government prevents the development of the American West, an area many of the wealthy were interested in because they already had purchased land in the West. The lack of a strong national navy hinders the success of American shippers because of smuggling and piracy. The weak government could not guarantee that runaway slaves are returned to their owners. And states did not speak with one voice in the area of foreign policy. This lack of a central government weakened the Confederation's influence in world affairs. So any previous form of government prior to the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention was either a confederation with too weak of a central government, or if we look at previous governments in other countries at this time, there were unitary systems with powers all concentrated at one level, centralized powers. 1787, the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention was unique because of this idea of federalism. power sharing between national and state governments. The goal of the convention was to strengthen the national government, Congress, and move from a confederation, state-centered, to a federation, power sharing. Most importantly, the framers in Philadelphia agreed that Congress should be given the powers to tax and to regulate interstate commerce. Interstate commerce, you will hear later more about it, is an important concept. It means commerce between, not within the states. Commerce between Philadelphia and New York and New Jersey, not within Philadelphia, within Pennsylvania. Who were the framers? Older textbooks often describe them as this group of wise, older men sitting in smoke-filled rooms making important decisions. Yeah, there were 55 men. Most of them had legal training. Most of them were wealthy merchants, land speculators, bankers, security brokers, and plantation owners. In fact, Chapter 2 in your textbook, Table 2.1, has a detailed overview of the founders' memberships in elite groups. Why is this relevant? It is relevant because we have to ask whether or not the framers were motivated by self-interest. Did creating a stronger central government help them, economically speaking, or were they more concerned about national unity, progress, and prosperity? Some historians, Charles Beard would be an example, would take the view of framers being motivated more by self-interest. This is often referred to as an economic interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. The idea that the Constitution was motivated primarily by the personal financial interests of the framers. So according to this point of view, the Constitution was designed to protect the framers' personal property and economic standing. What kind of system was created in Philadelphia? Let's look at the compromises made. If you visit Constitution Hall in Philadelphia, your tour guide might make a big deal about the compromise over representation, sometimes also referred to as the Connecticut Compromise or the Great Compromise. This conflict was between the larger states and the smaller states. So the question is, they're going to establish a Congress, a national government. How shall states be represented within this Congress? Obviously, smaller states are arguing for equal representation. Each state should have equal power. Not surprisingly, larger states are arguing for proportional representation. States with a larger population should have more representation. This conflict was actually resolved rather nicely, rather elegantly, we might say. And I'm sure you heard about it. The resolution of this conflict involved the creation of a bicameral legislature. Bicameral means two houses, two chambers. It created a house based on population and a Senate based on equal representation of each state. So Pennsylvania, for instance, has 19 members in the U.S. Congress. Vermont only one, based on a state's population. California has more than 50. Each state, however, has 2 senators. And this conflict is obviously still alive today. we still do have a bicameral legislature, a House and a Senate. A compromise that was much more controversial was the compromise over slavery, positing the northern states versus the southern states. Consider that slavery was not only the way of life in many states, but also the backbone of the southern states' economies. Southern states demanded that slaves should be counted in this formula of determining a state's representation in the House. So the more slaves, the more representatives. Northern states objected and also favored limiting the slave trade. How was it resolved? I'm sure you heard about it, you read about it in the textbook. The 3/5 compromise posited that each slave is to be counted as 3/5 of a person. And this compromise also allowed the slave trade to continue for 20 more years. Realistically speaking, it continued for an even longer time. What were the overall guiding principles of the document created in Philadelphia? The framers created a republic. They created a democracy, if you want to use this word, depending on how you think about democracy, but certainly it was a system that gave disproportionate influence to the elites. In fact, many of the framers, Alexander Hamilton would be a really good example, were really afraid of the masses, were really afraid of allowing the masses, the mob, that's a term he often used, of having too much influence over government. It was a government with a strong or much stronger central government, and it was a government based on the idea of separation of powers, 3 branches of government, a legislature, an executive, and a judicial branch. Recall from the last lecture that separation of powers is a really important concept. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Thus, the idea of separation of powers. Give each branch of government separate powers, allow them to exert checks and balances on each other, and by doing so, you minimize, probably never eliminate, but minimize the possibility of power being abused.